Well, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. And in fact, quite a bit of what I plan to present now has already been very elegantly presented this morning by Professor Wayne Parrott. Now, the biggest problem in GM regulation, at least partly, is because the safety studies were essentially extrapolation of drug regulation. Essentially, drug testing methods have been sort of imaginatively been transformed into food testing, and that in itself has brought in quite a bit of issues. Now, if someone were to bring in a new coronary artery stent, he has to establish a substantial equivalent to an existing cardiac stent. If someone were to bring in a new drug, he has to now establish that it is similar to a drug which is already in the market, but for the change whatever they have given in. The basic principle for this is, if you really want to know whether something is safe, something new is safe, then you have to compare it with something which is already being consumed or used by humans and already found to be safe, having history of safe use. So the whole concept is essentially a comparison between the new food and an existing one in terms of its content and also its behavior, etc. Now, the effects, therefore, could be the intended effects and the unintended effects, which have already been alluded to. So there are a whole set of test procedures for the intended effects, and essentially the substantial equivalence or the comparison between an existing crop and a new one is to see for the unintended effects. So then you do the entire agronomic traits comparison between the new and the isogenic crop. And then in addition, you do a detailed compositional analysis. The reason is compositional analysis has got clearly measurable quantities, and therefore you can measure these in terms of macronutrients or micronutrients, anti-nutrient, toxins, so on and so forth. And of course, built into that is the extent of variation which therefore exists. So there's a wide variation in the composition of any crop, which has already been shown. This could be due to climate. Climate may be a macro climate, that's why we think in terms of cultivating a crop once during Kharif season, once during Rabi season, or at different agroclimatic zones. Or it could even be a microclimate, that is, even within the same field, the climate in which a particular plant is sitting, the microclimate could be different from the other. There's no guarantee that your entire field is going to be identical, which in itself can bring about changes. And after the plant is being grown, then the kind of external treatment like the pesticides used, the herbicides used, the extent of these pesticides and herbicides coming in contact with the plants will in itself bring in a whole lot of variation. So we are not in our regulation taking into consideration those variations. We are assuming that if there's a plant side by side, a non-GM and a GM, everything comparison should be the same, which does not always happen. Then, of course, the purpose is already been mentioned. There are also some kind of expression of some toxic substances, which even in the normal course of expression can suddenly increase. A good example is what happened recently, maybe 2 years ago. We have a whole lot of health freaks who drink these juices made of bottle gourd juice and bitter gourd juice to say that it reduces insulin resistance. So a senior IAS officer drank one, and then he died within minutes. And then when they analyzed, they found that a toxin, cucurbitrin, was expressed at high levels in that particular bottle gourd. And then we looked up literature. We had an ICMR task force to look into the whole thing as to why it happened. Fortunately, we don't have a genetically modified bottle gourd. Otherwise, everybody would have said, it is GM, so he died. So then we looked into it, literature, and we found there are several case reports of people drinking the juice of bottle gourd and developing what is called a hemorrhagic gastritis. The whole intestine starts bleeding because this toxin binds to certain receptors and causes the bleeding. This toxin expression varies. A housewife knows what to do. Even each time she cuts any gourd, she tastes a little bit of the tip to see if it's bitter. If it's bitter, she discards that. And that has been used traditionally, which means toxin is inbuilt. And if under certain circumstances, it can overexpress and it can cause harm. This can happen even in natural variation, but one needs to understand, and this has to be kept in mind when we are comparing two plants. So then, of course, about the statistical significance of any observed differences, that statistically there would be differences, but then we need to see whether these differences are within the normal range and whether they are comparable with any other situation. So we need, therefore, literature from a range of standard cultivars that are in commercial production and coming from different regions. Do we have that, is the question. In India, do we have the entire compositional data from all the possible varieties? And there's another issue is method-to-method variation also occurs. So the testing facilities should have standardized methodology or should have a methodology which in itself has got a clear-cut range of values, and only then we can compare the data from one to the other. We are also likely to get into trouble now in the sense that there are some regulations which say that when any crop is being tested for toxicity in a private GLP accredited lab, a corresponding government lab should also do the same test and compare. Now, are these two labs identical? So they come up with different values, and that will unnecessarily disqualify either the lab or the crop, primarily because methodologies are different. So we have to have standardized methodologies, and there should be clear-cut cross-verification, external validation, if you were to use these. Now, whatever I'm reading out comes from the DBT guidelines, and also quite a lot of information I've taken from the recent Argentina slides. Now, our guideline says the trial site, the location of trial sites needs to be representative of the range of environmental condition under which the plant varieties would be expected to grow. So it means that whoever brought out this regulation earlier also were fully aware that there would be variations from site to site and from one climatic condition to the other. The number of trial sites need to be sufficient enough to allow assessment of compositional characteristics over this range. And the trials have to be conducted over sufficient number of generations to allow adequate exposure to the variety of conditions met in nature. Now, here comes the issue of what Dr. Rao just now mentioned. If every state were to have their own power to approve or disapprove, how do we do it in different agroclimatic conditions? For example, if Gujarat permits, I'll have data from Western India, whereas if West Bengal does not permit, I will not have data from Eastern India. Then in the case, then who is going to therefore generate this data if they do not permit? And in fact, we have replied to them saying that there's one rider which the court or others or the tech group, whatever I said is, no kind of open field trials will be permitted unless adequate safety data are generated. I would like to say that adequate safety data cannot be generated unless I have test material. And the test material can be done only when we grow it in the fields. So there seems to be a clear-cut kind of a confusion between the regulation as well as the kind of strictures which seem to be coming in. But the reason is, one, we should understand that we have to have data from different regions. Only then we will know the normal variation which exists just because the sites are different. And the trial site is required to be replicated to minimize the environmental effect and to reduce any effect from naturally occurring genotypic variation. And we have to have adequate sampling. It is not just one plant versus one plant. I've told you earlier that the microenvironment is going to be different, then the sampling methods becomes very, very critical. And the precondition for the analytes is the applicant needs to provide the criteria used to select nutrients. Now, if there are a whole lot of nutrients in the particular plant, do we have to do all of them? Or do we have to do only a few of them? If a developer decides that he will do only the critical ones and leave out some of the minor ones, or some of the minor ones you can't do simply because there's no validated methodology where the limits of detection, limits of quantification are not established, then the person who's applying should therefore say that I did the following and I did not do the following for the reasons which are mentioned. Then test materials, appropriate analysis must be performed on all parts of the plants which could be used as a food. And there is a difference between a leaf which is at an earlier stage of development with a leaf which is at a later stage of development. So when you're sampling, whoever is doing the sampling has to be extremely careful to see that identical growth or physiological condition is maintained between the test and well as the control. And the food material, for example, if we take transgenic corn, then since corn oil is also used and also the corn meal is used, both have to be tested for comparison. Even though the oil does not contain any GM material, the fatty acid analysis of the oil needs to be compared. Then, of course, all the ash and moisture and protein, non-protein components will be compared. So also all the fats and carbohydrates. Then the micronutrients, which are the vitamins and minerals, and anti-nutritional factors, and bioactive substances. This issue came into, again, discussion in a joint parliamentary committee when the Ayush, which is the Department of Ayurveda, Unani, they came up with an objection for BT brinjal, saying that it is used in Ayurveda and therefore some bioactive substances may change and therefore it will affect the treatment or whatever it is. So we asked them, fair enough, tell us what are the bioactive substances and what are the methods of measuring them. They had no answer. So how do we now quantify or measure any of these small bioactive molecules if we don't have a method of doing it? So unless we have a method or we need to standardize a method to look at the bioactive molecule, merely looking for it does not make any sense. Then also the presence of others like phytates, trypsin inhibitors, so on and so forth have to be seen. So if there is a difference, we have already discussed that statistical difference alone doesn't make any sense. It has to be at a level which is beyond what is within the normal range. And in case it is beyond that, then we have to do further testing to see whether it is consistently happening. Sometimes what happens, you may find a large difference in one crop, and when you do it in another, you may not find the difference. And then comes the more tricky issue of if it's a nutritionally modified crop. Here, it will not be equivalent. Now, let us say you have a golden rice where you have a beta-carotene production expression is more. When you compare the nutritional comparison between the GM and the non-GM and the normal rice and the golden rice, you will find that the carotenoids are higher in the golden rice. And under the circumstances where you are enhancing the nutritional content of a particular GM crop, we need to look at one, whether the nutrient is biologically similar to the nutrient which is present in the other sources, for example, from carrots or whatever. And second, whether it is bioavailable. So you need to do bioavailability study, either using stable isotopes or using animal studies. And the third will be, of course, to see what is the absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion, which is what we standardly do for pharmacology. Is when you give a new drug, you see how it gets absorbed, how long it stays in the body, where all does it go and deposit, how does it get excreted. This information is required if we are having a nutritionally enhanced substance against a standard nutrient. And we also have to look at the crop in terms of what extent it will reduce the diet-related disease and so on. That is more an issue of efficacy. So the first phase of any nutritional evaluation will be based on the nutrient composition data. And we have nutrient composition data for some of the crops in our country. And if there is a finding of unusual or unanticipated components or level of nutrients or nutritive substances, the food has to be subjected to further analysis. Okay. Now, intended nutritional modification is what I was just telling you. So you estimate the likely intake of the food. Once you have a nutrient in that, then what the issue someone raised this morning, what is the acceptable daily intake? We have acceptable daily intake for single component, in the sense for a nutrient, or let us say for a pesticide like that. You don't have anything like an accepted daily intake for the whole crop. We have what is called as RDS, recommended daily dietary allowances. We then have to see whether this heightened expression of a nutrient compared to the intake of that particular food material, even at the maximum possible intake, will it exceed the recommended daily allowances? And it is not only recommended daily allowances, we also have information of what is called upper safe limit of nutrients. So nutrient-enhanced crops consumption pattern should be calculated based on the available data from our country. Take the maximum consumed by any individual. Based on that, find out how much nutrient will get absorbed, for which you need bioavailability data. Find out in relevance to the daily recommended intake and the safe upper limit, where does this stand? So this is only to ensure that the enhanced nutrient does not actually increase the nutrient intake, because it is not necessarily true that higher, even whatever amount of intake you take, a nutrient is always safe. It is not true. There's enough evidence to show that nutrients can also cause harm at a higher level. So then another issue about food with enhanced nutrient is we have children eating the same food, we have pregnant women eating the same food, and so on. Now, what would be the impact of the heightened nutrient content on various physiological groups? Is it likely that if a child consumes a particular kind of a rice with more beta carotene, is it likely to be higher than what is recommended for a child, and so on and so forth? Then the intended modification in the plant constitution could change the overall nutrient profile. Another is, if again an unintended effect, you intend to increase the carotenoid expression, did it alter the expression of any other nutrient in the same plant? And unexpected alterations in nutrients could have the same effect. And although the GE plant components may be individually assessed as safe, the impact of the change on the overall nutrient profile also needs to be determined if it's a nutrient-enhanced plant. I'm sorry I'm reading the slides, because in regulation, it's unlike a science presentation. In regulation, every word may carry some meaning. So I have to only read and explain. So this, of course, is the summary of what in ILSI, Argentina, it was in July 2013, where I think Professor Parrott was there. What they actually summarized was, on compositional analysis, it is necessary to revisit and understand the purpose why we are doing this in the light of the state of knowledge about the natural variability, the genome plasticity, and the experience in the GM technology. Why do we do this? Is it for unintended effect, or to ensure the nutrient content, or is it for monitoring toxins? And revisiting the purpose of the composition analysis may provide a scope to reframe the analysis and to focus only on critical components. We can just identify, instead of doing a whole checklist of nutrients, we can only identify the key nutrients and say that if these are not different, the rest of them are unlikely to change. And there is a need to extend the composition databases to include local data and information on GM crops, new crops, and data obtained by alternative analytical methods. It would be helpful if best practice documents were developed on quality guidelines for regulatory science, as someone raised about GLP, versus good laboratory practices for composition and other studies. So we need to therefore have clear-cut guidelines, especially some of our colleagues here from the toxicology institutes who actually do this analysis and give the report will be on the firing line if they really do not know how exactly they're supposed to do. And so that the data which comes out of these laboratories are reliable and reproducible. Thank you, and this is my institute where I spent 3 decades. Thank you.